Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Melee's Turnwheel, the series that takes a retroactive look at the Fire Emblem series chapter by chapter. I'm your host, Melee Kirby, and today we're taking it back to chapter 6 of Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War. Gen 2 today. I'm excited. Never thought I'd make it this far. No, that's not true. I still hold that I'm going to make it at least to halfway through Thracia, or like roughly around there. I think I can make it through FE4. I don't know if I can make it through FE5 before the stress, I guess not stress, but like the workload that I have from other stuff catches up to me, and and Thracia I decide is not worth it. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For right now, news for this week. A couple things happened. One of them might have actually have happened when I recorded my last episode. It says January 8th here, and I think that I had recorded by then. I mean, it was about 3 weeks ago now, so I would assume so. I know I had a really long gap there, but I do think that I did record before then. I think I was just so eager to get into chapter 5 that I skipped over this one, which I shouldn't have done, um, because it's quite notable actually. A voice actor by the name of Brad Venable, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who voiced Costas and Adair from Three Houses, as well as Merlinus and Cormac from Heroes, passed away. So I hope that he's rested in peace because he did some great voice work on those characters. Nadir is great, brings a lot of personality to the game. So does Costas, honestly. For as little as he's around, he's got a lot of charisma. So he did some very talented voice work there. I don't know if I don't play Heroes, so I don't know anything about Merlinus and Cormac. So that's a shame. The other thing that I want to talk about, and I'm sure that everyone everyone who has even a little bit of stake in the Fire Emblem scene at this point knows about it. Choose Your Legends, which is the Fire Emblem Heroes poll that's done yearly to see the most popular characters. The halfway point was reached, and every year at the halfway point, they release interim results. And in this year's interim results, we found something very surprising. In the male category, they do males and females separately. Second place was Gatekeeper, who is incredibly minor character from Three Houses. He doesn't even have a name, but he has some really charming and endearing dialogue. He became a bit of a meme in the community. He's voiced by the same person who does Alm from Shadows of Valentia, which is the game right before. So he has gotten really popular. I expected him to be. I didn't even think was on Choose Your Legends. I had no idea he was on Choose Your Legends. But when this came out, I was not expect. Even if I had known that he was on Choose Your Legends, I wouldn't have expected him to be this high. It's very funny. He beat out Crom, it's kind of a shame because I love Crom. Crom's like one of my favorite protagonists in the series, but I'm actually really funny that this is happening. I really like it when the meme characters get really high because it's I don't know, it's just funny. And I don't play Heroes, so I don't have any stake in this. But even if I did, I feel like I'd be cool with like. Yeah, it's disappointing that Crom isn't. It might not win, but he already has a bunch of ults. Even if we wanted to say like, oh, we want. I can't imagine that the gap between Crom and Felix, for instance. I know Byleth's in the middle, but Byleth's. I don't know if Byleth has ults, but Byleth's about to get a bunch of ults probably. And then Felix is the only one who could win that doesn't already have like a ton of extra, a ton of alts. I'm losing track of my point here. What I'm saying is that I don't care if Crom loses, and because he already has so many, and even the next highest character who doesn't have so many, Felix, I don't think that it would be reasonable for him to win anyway, even if Gatekeeper dropped off. So yeah, I don't mind. I think it's a fun event that's happening. So I know I always say that I'm not going to talk about Heroes, and then I talk about Heroes anyway, but sometimes it's just some stuff that I feel like I have to comment on. Like, there was the Thracia units, and now there's this. Um, I guess I didn't have to talk about the Thracia units, but it's just we were in Yggdrasil, and it just felt right, especially since we get so little to begin with. So, yeah, I don't know. I might talk about it more than I originally let on. I guess I really only plan to if it's something worth talking about. Like there are a couple of banners, there's some Ike stuff going on that I'm not going to talk about just because I don't really care about any of that stuff. Nothing's really been going on in my sphere. Um, I've been really into the Game Grumps playing Danganronpa and love hating it. At least Aaron's love hating. I don't know what Dan thinks of it, but I like that series. I haven't played V3 and I haven't finished like the follow up anime sequel slash prequel, which is just called Danganronpa 3, I think. But I have played 1 and 2, and they're both really good, in my opinion. But they do have some weird quirks that are frustrating, like how they insist on doing flashbacks to stuff that happened like 5 minutes ago. I mean, I did watch Naruto, so I guess that I'm used to that. But yeah, they kind of. I mean, I don't want to say they put it on hold, but they haven't played it in like 2 days. Um, yeah, it's not even close to being on hold. It was no, it was they were switching. I think they were doing like Mario Party, and now they've just been doing Mario Party like 3 days in a row or something like that. So hopefully it'll come back soon. I'm not really interested in Mario Party, at least not right now. I'm very invested in their story with Danganronpa. I think that's all I have that's worth talking about. So without further ado, let's get into chapter 6 called Heirs to the Light. So I'm going to try to get through the story part quickly for a couple reasons. First of all, it's actually very straightforward and there's not a whole lot to talk about. I mean, a lot happens, but it's all kind of in service of the same core events. So I'm going to try to get through that quickly. The other reason is that we have a crazy number of characters to talk about, the most out of any chapter. There are 11 characters you get in this chapter, and then I also want to spend some time briefly talking about the substitutes and some stuff that has to do with them. So the opening narration explains that Arvis is now, because of the events of chapter 5, the sole ruling power in Yggdrasil, because Reptor's dead, Claude's presumably dead, Sigurd's dead, Langbolt is dead. All the major heads of houses were killed, and he was appointed as regent to Granvale, so he became the king of Granvale. And he decided that since all the countries were in shambles, they had conquered most of them anyway already. Again, Sigurd played his part in that, which is kind of grim when you think about how Sigurd kind of laid the groundwork for Arvis to invade Verdane and Augustria. He quickly put out resistance in Silesia and Leinster and basically conquered the entire continent and formed the Granvalian, or the Granvale Empire. Now, this sounds pretty bad, but it makes a note here that Arvis was actually really well liked by the public. He put down those resistances, and he probably wasn't made a big fan of people for that. But generally, at least it's not very specific about where. It might just be talking about Granvale, but Arvis is apparently pretty well liked, and he did a good job. And the world saw peace for 17 years, which isn't bad. I mean, I think that this is one of the main reasons that people like Arvis so much is that he wins, and he basically gets what he wants for 17 whole years, which is that the world is in peace and a better place, and people are nicer to each other. Um, this is kind of contradictory with some of the stuff that we see later, um, but yeah. So more recently, though, people have begun to suffer, and this is explained for a couple. It's not really explained why, like what the sudden shift is that happened to cause this, but people are starting to have problems with the Empire. There are child hunts, resistances are being stamped out even more fiercely, and it's just a really brutal iron fist dictatorial rule, and people aren't happy about it. Langbolt's son Isaac, or Langbolt's son Danon, has been placed as king of Isaac, and he is a monster. He rules like a complete tyrant. and no one likes him. Everyone cannot stand him, and he's an evil monster. He has two sons, Johann and Johalvir, and before anyone says it, yes, I know that a lot of these names are different now. A lot of the FE4 names got changed, and I think the Gen 2 characters were the most affected by this. There are almost all of the characters are changed at least a little bit now in Gen 2, but I'm familiar with them under certain names. I am used to them. I frankly, for some of the newer names, cannot pronounce them. And if I'm looking ever at the game to reference a character, I'm going to see that name. So I'm just going to refer to it as the names as I know them. So just keep that in mind. It's a little bit confusing. If you're not sure who I'm talking about, if you put the name into Google, it'll redirect you to the correct page. So he has two sons, Johann and Johal. All of this talk about not being able to pronounce the new names, I can't even pronounce the old ones. Johalvir. I recruited him, so I'm gonna have to pronounce that name a lot more on it. They're apparently a lot better. They're not quite as evil as he is. In fact, they're actually not that bad. It makes a brief mention of Danon's other son, his eldest son, the inheritor to House Dozel, being in Granvale, like in charge of the old family home there. Prince Shannon is raising a liberation army that's getting stronger and stronger, and among that liberation army is a man who they dub the Scion of Light, because he is rightful heir to the Granvalian throne, daughter of Deirdre and Sigurd, and son of Deirdre and Sigurd, and his name is Seleth. And that's how the events of the chapter proper begin. Danon and his general, I think his name is Harold, talk about how they found the rebel base, and Danon cautions them against rushing in because Oifi and Shannon are extremely powerful and stand a chance against any army just on their own. Harold mentions that it doesn't look like either of them are there at the moment, and so Danon says, okay, well then go invade and wipe them all out. We cut to the rebel base where Larse and Ulster are arguing over what to do. Now, I'm going to make a brief aside here, because obviously, anytime I say Larse and Ulster, if you have their substitute characters, then it will be swapped out for them. In case anyone is not aware or just doesn't remember, I'm going to be getting 4 substitute characters. Bridget's 2 kids, Patty and Fevale, are going to be Daisy and Asalo. And then, who's the other one? Oh yeah, Sylvia's 2 kids, Lean and Corpool, are going to be Layla and Charlo. So I'm going to be referring to them. I will try to make note of any notable differences in story between the original characters and the substitute characters, because there are some. They aren't exactly carbon pasted copies. Especially notable is that a lot of substitute characters will get secret events to boost their stats that the original characters will not, or at least get them much earlier. Because a lot of original characters do get stat boosting conversations, but they don't come until late into the game. Anyway, Larse and Ulster are arguing here over what to do. Larse says that they should go out and fight. Ulster says that they should run away, or at least be more cautious. Larse mentions that she hates men and hates the Empire because she was being captured by Empire soldiers and would only have gotten away, or wouldn't have been able to get away, if Shannon had not saved her. So that kind of drops their relationship. Then we get introduced to Seleth, who comes in, starts talking about what to do as well. He says that he wants to help out the citizenry, and comments that Ulster probably only is hesitating at all because he was ordered to keep Seleth safe, which Ulster confirms is true. But they're eventually they decide on, okay, we're going to take the fight out there and we're going to attack the Isaach soldiers and start this whole liberation thing a little early. We get to see Lana, who is Aideen's child. Ulster and Larse are Aira's kids. Lana wants to come help. Seleth says no, you're just a healer, this is no place for you. Lana kind of puts up a fight and says, listen, I want to help too. I want to help the people here who have given me so much, and I can heal, so I can help people. So Seleth says, alright, fine, you can come along. And that's where the chapter starts in terms of gameplay. So I want to spend some time talking about these characters. So I guess let's start with Seliph. We only get 4 right off the bat, so that's nice. We can talk about him in bite-sized chunks. Seliph is the main character of Generation 2, and a lot of these guys you're going to find their quality depends a lot on the characters who you make their opposite parent. Now, Seliph cannot have any variance in opposite parent. It's always going to be Deirdre, so you never have to worry about that. What can make a difference is the items you pass to him. I passed him some pretty good items, not like everything that he would ever want. He doesn't have the leg ring. He doesn't have a brave sword or anything like that, but he does have a silver sword with crit on it, and he has, I think, the power ring and the paragon ring and a couple others. So he's doing pretty well for himself. He's already at like level 11 or something like that by the end of this chapter. Seliph is really, really good. He's like Sigurd if Sigurd had it took Sigurd way longer to get good, but also had all of the tools necessary to get good like very, very quickly. So it's you do have to put up with Seliph being kind of mediocre for a bit, but eventually he will become phenomenal. He'll just become Sigurd 2.0. In fact, actually arguably a little bit better. Um, which is crazy. I'm not going to spend too long talking about Seliph as a character in terms of writing, just because that's what we're going to be doing throughout this whole game. But at the start, at least, he seems very earnest and eager to help. He reminds me a lot of Sigurd. I mean, it's Sigurd had more, I guess, a little bit more edge to him. There was some stuff he did that was a little bit more questionable, but they both had a very earnest desire to help people in need and to pay off their debts. That was a big thing. I mean, Sigurd was always, extremely grateful to those in his life who had helped him, and Seliph seems to be the same way. So they're, like father, like son on that one. Seliph, honestly, even at the end of by the end of chapter 6, seems pretty milk toast. So I'm not really super excited about where the story is going to take his character. At least Sigurd was milk toast, and that was like used to the advantages of the story because everything that a traditional Fire Emblem protagonist would do was either subverted in some way or punished. So Selip's a little bit blander, I think, but I don't know. Maybe it'll turn around. Larse is, I guess I'll talk about Larse and Ulster together because they're extremely similar. Both of them are foot units who use swords and have really good skill sets, pretty much no matter who you make their dad, but obviously giving them a dad who passes down swords and who will give them good growth rates in the right areas will be good. I made Noish their dad, so they have critical, which is nice. They can crit right off the bat, and they have Odo Holy Blood, which means they have high skill growth rates. So they're going to be leveling up skill and going to be able to crit a lot more frequently. And then they also have Astra, which is just overkill, honestly. Um, they get Nile, and there's a couple others that they get that are really good. The downside, of course, they're foot units. I haven't had to say this in a while. We haven't had any new characters since chapter 3. So, but yeah, they're foot characters, and the maps are just getting even bigger still. Now, in this map, they can actually do a lot to help just because you're limited in your other options, especially early on. And even when you get some mounted characters, I mean, Diarmid's good and Orphe is very good, but other than that, your options aren't like stellar. So you gotta be a little bit willing to use them here, I think. And I like using them, so I'm probably going to continue to use them throughout the game. It's just probably not super worth it. In terms of character, Larse is very hot-headed and doesn't care for men all that much. And Ulster is also kind of hot-headed. It seems like he kind of puts on a front of being calm to, he's more able to think rationally when the situation calls for it. But he also likes a good fight. And Larse has a strong personality, but it's really just a gimmick, and I mean, that's okay. Again, I think it's okay to have a gimmicky character in a game where they're not really going to get a lot of opportunities to shine outside of that. She does get some characterization later on that's cool, but I'll briefly talk about their substitutes. Uh, Radney is very similar to her. I think she hates men even more. I don't know the reason why. I think she was exposed more to the brutality that some of the Isaac soldiers caused. So that might have been it. She doesn't have any skills other than Pursuit, which is a class skill, and she doesn't have any Holy Blood. So she's not that good. But fun fact, she is actually the series' first female hero. She promotes to hero in this game instead of Swordmaster, so that's cool. Larce does not. Only Radney, which I think is interesting. And then Dalvin, I think he used to be called like Rudelvon or something like that. Um, but I'm looking at the wiki now, so Dalvin is also a Myrmidon, and he has Vantage. He does have a skill, which is nice, and he also promotes the hero. No Holy Blood again, so yeah, they're fine. They're nothing special. Vantage, I guess, is kind of nice if you want to give him a good weapon, maybe something with some crit uh, or like a brave sword or something. He might be useful, but I can't imagine that would be worth it at all. Um, yeah, the substitutes are straight up worse. I mean, they usually are, but sometimes the gap is a little bit smaller than this. And then finally, Lana is a healer. All of the stabs that you've passed down to her from Aideen will make a difference here. And then she will have minor, because I married Aideen to Claude, she will have minor Balagi Holy Blood, which means you can use all stabs in the game, basically, other than Valkyria. As I've mentioned in Gen 1, it's a lot easier to keep a foot healer relevant compared to um, a foot like combat unit, just because range stabs work, and support units are, it's not as pressing that they're on the front lines all the time, so they're a little bit better, I think, when you're talking about foot characters. She doesn't really have much of a character here, honestly. She just has uh, kind of a stubborn personality, it seems like, and she refuses to stand by the sides as people get hurt. Pretty standard cleric stuff, I think. Nothing too crazy. Reminds me a little bit of Mist. Her substitute has a notable difference in that she has a crush on Seliph, which I thought that Lana did too, but their character pages don't really make specific mention of Lana. Lana's doesn't make any specific mention of this, whereas Mana's does. So, and then Mana as a gameplay unit, pretty much, I don't want to say worthless. I mean, like I said, if you get good stabs on her, it can be fine. But she doesn't have any skills, and it's okay because she doesn't need any. But only joining with heal and only having 2,000 gold, so she can't get a whole lot of other stuff on her. It's just not really. It's not ideal. It's really not ideal. I immediately sent Ulster back into the Oh, that's all the characters, by the way. I immediately sent Ulster back into the castle so I could or I sent Larce and Ulster back into the castle because Larce is holding on to a silver blade that I want to give to Ulster. So when I did so, I realized that Ulster did not have enough money to buy it. So I have to wait until I can get some villages with him. But notably, I would have just gone to the arena, but there is no arena in this chapter, which is kind of a bummer. I don't know why they took it out of chapter 6. I mean, I know it wasn't in prologue, but I don't know why that matters. I mean, I guess they wanted some symmetry here. I have no idea. After a couple turns, Oifi, Diarmid, and Lester show up, and they realize that Seliph has been fighting and want to get into the fray to help him. Oifi is this game's Jagan character. Generation 1 did not have a Jagan character. A Jagan is named after the very first Jagan from FE1, who is a very strong promoted unit who is head and shoulders above everyone else in your army. More often than not, they will fall. I guess I shouldn't say more often than not, but they have bad growth rates, usually, and as a result, people tend to stop using them as their stats stop going up. There are a lot of ways to make Jagans, even ones with bad growth rates, viable in the long term, but it's not always easy. Oifi kind of spawned a sub-archetype of that, which is essentially considered to be Jagans that have good growth rates, or Jagans that don't fall off. Again, I don't think that those are necessarily the same thing, but, that's kind of just how the fan base perceives them. The point is that Oifi is a good long-term unit, even though he starts off so strong. He doesn't really have a downside to using him. Don't spam him or anything, especially in this chapter where you really want Seliph to get as much experience as possible. But for the most part, there's not really a downside to overusing Oifi, or at least using him as much as you need to. Don't be afraid to use him on whatever is most convenient. Lester is sometimes good. He really just needs Midir or Jamk as a dad because that will give him the brave bow. And if he gets the brave bow, he's good. Otherwise, he's just kind of middle of the road because there's not really anyone that can. I mean, I guess even if he gets like the killer bow, but he needs good bows is the thing because with an iron bow, he's really not going to do that much. Midir is probably his better dad just because he gives him pursuit as well. Jamk does not give him pursuit, so just keep that in mind. I had Claude as his dad for a better Lana, so I kind of took the L there on Lester, no pun intended. But it's, I'm fine with having a bad Lester. I knew that that would be the case when I decided to marry them together. I did mention that I think that Lester does have some niche utility as being like having really high res. I mean, he does get the major Bragi Holy Blood, which means that he's going to be able to he's going to get really high res growths. So he might be good at taking on mages if I can get a good bow to him at some point. Probably not going to use a Salo, so I might as well just give any bows he gets to him. But he can use every bow in the game. He does still have the Ulir blood that'll allow him to do that. So you know, Diarmid is pretty good as well. I think that he's a little bit underrated. I think it's just because the meta of Gen 2 is so centralized around Seliph and to a lesser extent characters like Oifi and Ares. And if you're willing to put in the effort, eventually Leaf. These are just such juggernauts that characters like Diarmid kind of fall to the side. But honestly, I mean, I don't see why he's any worse than someone like Beowulf. I mean, I guess people argue that Beowulf isn't all that good. I think he's actually significantly better than Beowulf, like by a lot, because obviously the inheritance and the earlier availability make a big difference. Even if Beowulf is not his dad, he'll have like a different growth set, but it's honestly fine, and he's good. He's a really good character. I like using him a lot. He's always like a staple on my playthroughs because he's just really good all around. He doesn't have any real downsides other than just being not Seliph, which is his really only crime, at least that I can think of. I mean, I don't think next chapter the characters on horseback are going to be at a little bit of a disadvantage just because of the desert, but in this map he's really useful. There's a lot of axe using enemies that he can fight, and he has high mobility, and I gave him the brave sword. But even if you only gave him like a weak, I guess that's the thing, right? Because not everyone's going to give him the brave sword, and he can't always inherit good swords. So I guess if he's not using good swords, then that might be a problem. But I don't know. I feel like he's still at least pretty useful. If he's not one rounding, he's still doing really good chip damage for the most part. Lester and I guess I should talk about Oifi. Well, we already know about Oifi. It's really cool to see him come back. Um, this is an aspect of this game that I really really enjoy, which is seeing older characters come back. Like characters who were too young to fight in Gen 1, and we only see Oifi and Shannon really. But there are a couple of other characters who were mentioned, like obviously Seliph is here. We know him, but Shannon and Oifi are. It's really cool to see them and use them as combat units instead of just seeing them in the story. It's great, and they're characters who've grown attached to this whole time. Especially Shannon. I love Shannon in Gen 1. Um, Oifi was a little bit blander, but he's cool here. He just really cares about Seliph. He's extremely loyal to Sigurd, and he wants to take care of Seliph no matter the cost. So I always think it's cool when the villains acknowledge the strength of like enemy, like your strongest units. This happens a lot in FE8 where people are just like jerking off Seth like a lot because he's so strong, which is great. I love that. But they do it a little bit here with Oifi too. I mean, Shannon's the Prince of Isaac, so I think that people kind of understandably are thinking that he's going to be strong. But Oifi has really made a name for himself too, which is cool. Lester and Diarmid are not super well defined characters from what I remember. I mean we have a few conversations here. Diarmid, I'm not. Does Diarmid have any conversations here? Let me see. Nope, no conversations right now. He only gets one in chapter 7. Well, that's the earliest I should say. So we don't get a whole lot of his characterization. I guess he's like loyal. He really cares about his sister. We know that from later. So does Lester. I don't know. They remind me a little bit of Alec and Noish. They're just not particularly well defined characters because they don't get enough dialogue to really have them shine. He is one of the few characters that is in both this game and FE5. I think it's like Leaf, Nana, maybe a couple others. Like playable characters, I should say. As for their substitutes, it is interesting because Lester's substitute, Dimna, is not. He has some confidence issues as a result of being a commoner and not having any holy blood. This is something that a few characters seem to have, although I've seen conflicting reports on whether Mana fits in this category. Some people say that she does, or some sources say that she does, some sources that say that she doesn't. I'm going to look at I like the conversations and stuff to get a sense of what she's like. But in this one, she only has one with Dimna that's basically identical to the one that Lester has with Lana. Tristan is Diarmud's substitute, and he doesn't have any notable personality. Apparently, I'm interested to see. Well, here's the thing, right? Because I'm gonna have to use the Serenus Forest script, and I did look. I wasn't able to find like a more updated one with the Project Naga translation, and that script isn't the best at conveying personality. So I'm going to do my best to try to convey what these characters are like. But honestly, if you're interested, just go play the game with them. Just go play genealogy, kill off a couple of your Gen 1 moms, and then play with a few substitutes like I'm doing this run. So that's my suggestion. I'm not the best at showing off the personalities of the characters, and I'm not going to be just because there's so little to go off of here. There's just not a lot of dialogue. There's no support, so I'm not able to convey that stuff as effectively as I might like. In terms of gameplay, the only notable thing is that Tristan has critical. That's it, really. His growth rates are really bad, though. Like even for a substitute character, like damn, those are pretty bad. 130 HP growth, which is interesting, but everything else is just dog shit. But critical is kind of cool. I guess that's really all I have to say about him. Or if he doesn't have a substitute, he's a static character. There are some characters that are always going to be the same no matter what. Uh, Seliph and Leaf are not. They're like yeah, I think just those two and Altena, I guess, are semi static just because you're always going to get them and they're always going to be similar, but you can pass down inheritance differently, so they're not exactly the same. Oifi, Shannon, and then a couple others like Ares and Julia are always going to be the same, no matter what. One gameplay detail that I really like here is that Oifi joins with an Armor Slayer. Ulster also has one for me, but he's not going to have one for everyone. Oifi will always have an Armor Slayer, which is really nice because it lets him show off his power against a lot of Armor Knights in this map, which is cool. There's a ton of them, especially at the beginning. Ulster and Larce have a conversation here where they talk about their mom a little bit. Apparently, Aira never followed after them when they went to go to Isaac with Seliph and Oifi and Shannon. Ulster muses to himself that, I guess muse isn't really the right word, but he thinks to himself and kind of speaks out loud that he thinks that she might have died at the Battle of Valhalla, but Larce thinks that she's still alive and that she's still going to come for them, which is, she's hopeful and optimistic and kind of gets mad at Ulster for even suggesting the opposite, and Ulster kind of backs down like, yeah, you're right, I'm sure she will. But you can tell that he's not really buying it himself. This is what I mentioned earlier when I said that Larce has some characterization here that, she's still, I mean, I don't want to call her delusional, that might be a little mean, but it does seem like she's kind of hoping for something that's probably never going to happen. I mean, it has been 17 years, so the odds of it working out that way are pretty unlikely, but she still holds out hope, which is cool. It's good to see, but I mean, at this point, it might be a little bit of an unhealthy thought process. I don't know. Lana and Lester have a conversation which is pretty mundane for the most part, except it confirms that Aideen is still alive, which is the first hint. I guess hint is the wrong word, but the first confirmation that we get that there are some survivors, or there were some survivors of the Battle of Valhalla. Aideen is one of them. She got away and didn't get killed by Arvis. Oifi and Seliph have a conversation where Oifi basically just confirms that the world has gone to shit, and pretty much everyone has it as bad as Isaac or worse. And Selef just expresses a desire to go out and liberate the world from the Granville Empire. He just really wants to help people. And Oifi, you know, they kind of get into a little bit of a fight about how this starting the fighting without them was a little reckless, but it needed to be done. And then Oifi kind of concedes, like, yeah, you're probably right, it did. Before capturing this first castle, there's a couple of secret events you can get with the soldiers the yellow soldiers who are with Johann and Johalvir, and they give some hints about their loyalties. You can talk to them with either Diarmid or Lester or their substitutes. No one else though, which I think is weird. Anyway, uh, the Johalvir soldier just says that Johalvir is really interested in Larcy. It's actually really funny. He says something like, "Oh man, I can't believe that the commander would go after someone so hot-headed. Personally, I like my women." And then he kind of cuts off his, "Wait, why am I telling you this?" I thought it was funny. And then the other one just complains that Johann is a real skirt chaser, and Johann says, like, "Oh, you talking shit?" And he says, "No, no, not at all." So that's funny. They really wanted you to know that these guys were recruitable. I think no, they're not the first recruitable enemies. Beowulf would be, so, or no, not even Jamk would be. I think no, Aira. I guess Aira, you don't talk to her. I don't know. Oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake earlier. There's a village where we find out that Brian, his oldest son, Danin's oldest son, that is home in Granville, and he talks about how Johann and Johavir are obsessed with Larce. It's the only village of note for this section. I think it might be the only village at all for this section. I think it might be the only village of note for the entire chapter, to be honest, except for the one with the secret event. When we capture this first castle, the first boss is a pushover. When we capture the first castle, we find Lewin is here, and he seems to have some sort of pre-established relationship with Selef, although it's not clear exactly how they know each other. I don't know if it's ever made clear. I don't think it is, but Lewin is the second person we've seen confirmed to have survived the Battle of Valhalla. Well, I mean, we'll get into that later. There's a plot twist about Lewin later in the game that I'm looking. I'm not going to spoil what it is. I want to try to keep it under wraps for maybe someone who hasn't played this game before. But it is. I'm trying to view this dialogue through that lens to see if it adds any new insight. And honestly, it doesn't really. And I'm going to talk more about this later because there's some debate about what the plot twist means for Lewin's character. But as far as we can tell, everything is normal. Lewin is uh, kind of going around the world and seeing how things are, and kind of serving as an advisor to Selef a little bit here. They talk about how Shannon is looking for Balmung in the desert, which is his holy weapon that his birthright. He thinks that it's somewhere in the desert and is looking for it. Lewin introduces Selef to Julia, who is someone that he found very badly hurt many years ago, and says that she lost her memory of what's going on around that time, and it doesn't seem to have gotten it back at all. Lewin is heading off to Leinster, so he wants Selef to look after Julia, just to keep things make it easier for him, so he doesn't have to drag her around. And that's really the end of that. After we capture this castle, Julia shows up, and she doesn't have any items in her inventory. Eventually, she's going to get more. She's going to get a men's staff by talking to Lana later, which is going to be nice. And then she can get one of two. I think I've heard she might be able to get both, but I don't know how to get both. Light tomes, one of which is way better than the other, but we'll talk about that later. She has a very muted personality. She's super quiet, and she reminds me of Marianne a little bit in a way. She has that same kind of like shy girl personality. And she doesn't even seem to be shy, honestly, more just like very subdued and quiet. Um, Kind of boring as a result, but we can talk more. She's going to get a lot of screen time later, so we'll have more time. Just like Deirdre, she doesn't die if she's killed. People don't die when they are killed. She instead gets kidnapped, and if you capture the next castle, she will be there and can fight alongside you again. There's a bit of a funny a bit of a funny situation going on with Selef and Julia, which is the subject of a lot of controversy in this game. This is a plot twist that I will spoil because I think it's important to understanding part of what makes this game so weird at times. Selef and Julia are half siblings. I mean, this isn't like a surprise to anyone. If you look at her, she just looks identical to Deirdre. But she and Selef are half siblings. Arvis is Julia's father, and but Deirdre is the mother, and Deirdre is also Selef's mother. As a sort of echo to Sigurd and Deirdre's relationship, they start off with really, really high love points. I think they start off with 495 love points, which is crazy. They're almost ready to fall in love right on the spot. Keep in mind, you need 500 to fall in love. And they don't know, obviously. They have no idea that they are related to each other. But they start off with really high love points. And you can... what's supposed to happen is that they actually have a negative love growth. So over time, their love points will go down. And this is supposed to echo them like realizing over time, like, oh, hey, wait, we're related. And that's uncomfy. So yeah, they're not. It's not you're not supposed to be able to pair them. Is the way that it is intended. Now there is either a glitch or an oversight in the code that makes it possible for them to get married. It's entirely unintentional. I do not believe that there's any unique dialogue for this. It's just a glitch, basically. And it's called jealousy. Now, jealousy is something that you can do with any characters, but it's really only relevant here. Basically, you can raise your love growth by a significant margin. When two characters stand next to each other, their love growth is boosted by 5. So for Selef and Julia, if they were to stand next to each other, their love growth would not go down. It would just stay at 0, and they wouldn't go up or down at all. But if you position characters in a certain way, and there's like a guide you can look up on Serenus Forest, then you can actually raise it even higher and have it go up to plus 10, sometimes even plus 15, I think. So it is possible using this system to raise Julia and Selef's love growth to a positive value, and as a result, they will get married almost immediately. Again, I think this is a glitch. It's not intended to be done, and people who ship Selef and Julia make me very deeply uncomfortable, especially considering that the other half-sibling relationship is Arvis and Deirdre, and they end up creating the spawn of Satan, which is, I mean, just Satan himself, honestly, which is just, it's something else that people think people see that and think, huh, I'm going to ship Selef with Julia. Boggles my mind, man. Boggles my mind. There is some other uncomfortable incest here. I mean, Shannon and Larce, I mentioned this in a previous episode, but they're really pushed as a pairing here. They have plenty of love point conversations. They're like connected in the story. She has a crush on him in the story. It's very weird and very awkward, and I don't like it. So that is definitely a valid criticism of the game. But it is, it is what it is, I guess. But half siblings, no. Half siblings, I definitely think is uh, not something that the game is trying to push in any way. It was a complete accident that it was even possible. One thing I forgot to mention in the Lewin conversation is that Lewin kind of bemoans to himself how he feels like shit because he's gone back to living life as a shitty bard. He left Selyse again. His mom died because, when Granville took over, obviously they killed the ruling queen. And he's now traveling the world on his own. And but he seems to be invested in helping the Liberation Army conquer the Empire, so that seems fine. At least he's doing that. This is where Fee and Arthur show up, and there's a nice little a detail here where Fee is talking to her Pegasus, and it's revealed that she has named her Pegasus Manya after the Aaron's sister, I guess her aunt, because Fee is Aaron's child. Fee is giving Arthur a lift. I believe they were both in Selyse, and now Arthur is heading to Ulster, where he hopes to find his sister. and Fee is heading. I don't think she's really heading anywhere. She just she wants to find her brother eventually, but unlike Arthur's sister, who was taken away from him unwillingly, Fee and Said, her brother, split up on purpose to go look for their father, who for me is Azel, but for in all intents and purposes, completely canonically is Lewin. They both decide to join up with the Liberation Army just to kind of like tie things over. And yeah, I mean that's really it. Actually, I don't even think Arthur has a conversation with Seliph. Maybe he does. Um, no, yeah, he does. He does. He does. Fee also does, and neither of them are really particularly interesting. They just say that they want to help out. Erin is dead, by the way. This is confirmed. She did survive the Battle of Valhalla, but she died later due to illness. This is the point where you can recruit Johann or Johalva. You do have to pick one or the other, which always seemed weird to me because they're both nice guys. Both of them are not evil. They're maybe kind of assholes, but not, they're not terrible, terrible people. They're always willing to protect the innocent, and they refuse to engage in the child hunts, which we'll see later. Their recruitment conversations are pretty different. Johalva is obviously very interested in Larce, but he's also invested in stopping the tyrannical rule of his dad because he's just doing all these terrible things and he can't stand by it. Johann does mention in a boss conversation with his dad that that he wants to turn against him for the sake of the country, but in the recruitment conversation, he really only talks about wanting Larce. So there's a little bit of a difference in characterization there, I guess. Now, when it comes to these two, there's actually a lot of factors that can play into recruiting one over the other. Now, in pretty much every way, recruiting Johann is the better option. He's the better unit. He gets you better content and more content, and I'll explain that later. But I will say that there is actually one significant advantage to picking Johalva or Johalvir, and it's that picking Johalvir is much, much faster. Instead of having to go around and capture a couple different castles, if you want all the stuff, you only have to capture one. I mean, I guess you only have to capture one anyway, but it's if you want more stuff, then you're gonna have to capture either the one that Johann's guarding or the one that Johalvir is guarding, and the one that Johalvir is guarding is much, much further out of your way. So if you want to go faster, recruiting Johalva is a lot easier to say the least. Now, Johann is a much better unit. He is on a horse, and he has Vantage, which Johalva has. I keep calling him Johalva because that's the old name. Johalvir has Cost, which is pretty much as good, I would say, in synergy with the Brave Axe, which both of them can get access to in this chapter. One of the bosses drops it. Vantage lets Johann attack twice, which can potentially just kill an enemy before they even get a chance to attack him. And then, obviously, the more rounds of combat there are, the more chances there are for Johalvir to attack with the Brave Axe. So a cost works well with that as well. But Johann being on a horse is a big deal. And just honestly, that by itself is just way, way better for me than Johalvir. Johann doesn't really get talked about as being a good unit, and I don't super get why. I think he's pretty serviceable by all means. Being a horse unit that's decent in combat in this game automatically makes you better than a lot of foot units that are great at combat. I would say that he's arguably better than Larce and Ulster. I would say that he's arguably better than, unless you gave him Forseti, Arthur is probably not as good as Johann. There's a few other characters like that. Maybe even like if you give like a bad dad to Lester, possibly. I'd say that even unless you have a really terrible dad, any decent physical dad is probably gonna make Jarmud better than Johann. So I don't think he's that bad, honestly. I think he's fine. He's not great. He's not fantastic, but compared to Johalvir, he's a lot better. Um, the way that this works out is whoever you recruit, their castle turns green, and you can't capture a green castle. So if you recruit Johalvir, then his castle turns green, and you can't recruit it anymore. If you recruit Johann, his castle turns green, but the difference is that there are enemies coming from behind Johann that will recapture that castle. So you can capture both of them, whereas if you recruit Yohavir, you're probably not going to be able to capture the one that he's guarding. What's significant about this is that there is a conversation that you only get if you capture Yohavir's castle. It's between Selef and Lana, I believe. It just basically tells her to stay safe and that he wants her to not get too far in harm's way. And it gives her plus 3 HP and 100 love points. So it's a good conversation. You just can't get it if you don't capture Yohavir's castle. Now, here's the thing though. I always choose Johan, and this time I wanted to mix it up a little bit, so I went with Yohavir. Just to see what he was like. I wanted to use him for the first time. So maybe I'm talking out of my ass. Maybe I'll end up deciding that Yohavir is way, way, way better. But I just doubt it very much. There's a village here northwest of Isaach Castle where if Selef villages it, he gets a little bit of a different conversation. The villagers are just talking about how great he is, and one of them even offers his granddaughter's hand in marriage. And they just have a fun little interaction there. I highly recommend going to look it up. It's great. It's funny. Other than that, it's not really. He doesn't get anything out of it though. There's a skill ring village in this area as well, and the other two have just gold, and I don't think they really say anything interesting. Now, Selef has a conversation with Julia that's slightly different depending on which castle you conquered first. If you conquered Isaach first, which is the one that Johan is guarding, he will give her a Nosferatu tome, which is by far the better option in my opinion. If you capture Yohavir's castle first, he will give her an Aura tome, which is much more powerful, but Nosferatu has the advantage of healing Julia whenever it's used, so she could potentially do some tanking if you're careful and don't put her in range of enemies that will double attack her. She can actually be a very serviceable tank, which is interesting considering she's so squishy. This is why I said that it's faster to recruit Yohavir, because you only really need to recruit Isaach, and if you don't care about the Lana conversation, then you can recruit Isaach, conquer Isaach, get the Nosferatu conversation, and then just go straight on, beat Danon, and take his castle, and then you don't even have to worry about Yohavir's castle at all. And then the last thing I want to talk about before we round out the chapter is actually a couple things. First of all, there's a secret event here with Radney, which is Larce's substitute. If she waits next to Johan or Yohavir, depending on who you recruited, 10 times, then she gets a stat boost. I believe it's plus 2 strength, plus 3 luck, or something like that. There's also a secret event if Dimna goes into Isaach Castle after it has been conquered, and it's a cute little conversation where he gets some characterization, and I guess this is where he grew up. He talks to an old childhood friend, and it shows how much he values his home, and he's just happy to have a conversation with this person. He gets a charm that gives him plus 5 strength, which is pretty significant. The other thing I wanted to talk about are the conversations between Johan and Yohavir and Danon, their father. I just looked, and it seems like the thing I said earlier might have been wrong about how Johan has a conversation where he talks about how he doesn't like what Danon's been up to. He really only talks about Larce again, which is not ideal. This might have been in like a later translation, or maybe I just completely made it up, or I was under the impression that he had a conversation here. Someone's gotta double check that for me, because I was pretty sure that he did. And I mean, he does have a conversation. It's just he only mentions that he's pledged his life to Larce or Radney, but whatever. There's a secret event here with Radney, who is Larce's substitute, and if you have her wait next to Johan or Yohavir, whichever one you recruited, for 10 turns, then she will get plus 2 strength and plus 3 luck, I believe it is. Now, the reason that I mentioned this is because I spent a while under the impression that it would work with Larce as well. It does not. I was like spamming end turn like over and over and over again, or wait, I guess, and nothing was working. I was like, huh, what's going on? Yeah, it's only Radney. I made that mistake. It was funny. Like I said, there's not really a whole lot to talk about in this chapter. It's pretty straightforward. The whole idea is just there's a bunch of villages saying the world has gone to shit. The world has gone to shit. Everything is terrible. We hate it here. The empire sucks, and everything about it is awful. It's just a lot of that for like an entire chapter. Now, once you capture the final castle, we have some story. Lewin comes back. Selef's kind of surprised that he's already done in Leinster, which is kind of a maybe a hint that he was moving unnaturally fast. I don't know. Uh, Lewin's kind of just been all around the world and talking about how it's at a critical turning point, and things need to start happening now because destiny is upon everyone or stuff like that. He talks about how Arvis wasn't always bad, but that recently it's been awful and things have been going really bad really fast. And in fact, he actually has a small reveal here where everyone's talking about how terrible Isaac was. He reveals that Isaac actually had it better than a lot of places just because Johann and Johavir wouldn't do the child hunts. A lot of places are doing the child hunts, and that's obviously worse than could be imagined. He does some talking about how Selef is the world's only hope and all that stuff. Selef kind of accepts this and says that he wants to be the hero that the world needs. And then Lewin kind of talks about how he's going to have his friends by his side, and Sigurd inherited more than just blood and stuff. He also passed down a lot of bonds and a lot of people who are going to fight with him because they respect Sigurd's legacy. And Fee is already one of those people. I mean, we talked about she has a conversation with Selef in which she mentions that her mother was fought alongside Sigurd and she wants to fight alongside Selef because he's her he's his son. And then finally, they decide that they are going to head down to Leinster because Quan's son is there and they need to go help him out. He started his own rebellion and basically lost really badly, so he needs reinforcements. And that's how the chapter ends. They decide to go down to Leinster and help out Quan's son. I think that as a follow up to chapter 5, this is about as good as you can get. And that's not to say it's bad, it's actually quite good. I think that it's hard to follow up something like that because it so dramatically shifted the story from where it was at the beginning. And how do you restore the status quo after something like that? Um, I'm not the first person to say this take on death in media, but I think that um, death in media is really only meaningful. I don't think it's only meaningful, but I think it's at its most meaningful when you see the consequences of it. A character dying isn't inherently going to be an emotional or interesting plot point, even if you're invested in the character, because you don't know. A lot of the time, the sadness and the emotion comes from the implication of what their death means for the world, whether that's explicit in the story, whether we see that, or maybe not the world, but at least other characters. Um, whether that's explicit, as it is here, and we get to see firsthand what those consequences are, or implicit, whether you're filling in the blanks with your own mind. Um, and in that way, this chapter really succeeds. It paints a very grim picture of what the world has come to in the aftermath of the Battle of Valhalla, and it's, I mean, maybe a little bit heavy-handed. I'd think that that's really all any of the characters are talking about. It's all what any of the villages are talking about. Is just this whole idea of like, yeah, the world sucks now. Um, but I do think that it's done pretty well. Um, I think that there's a lot to be said for the way it handles that, and I like it. It's good. And it's better than nothing. It's better than not driving it home enough, I guess is what I would say. There's not really any point in being subtle about something like this, and I think it even um, does invoke a little bit of subtlety, whether intentionally or not, with the idea that no one will shut the hell up about how bad Isaac is, and obviously things in Isaac are pretty bad, but the fact of the matter is that they are better off than a lot of nations now because they don't have to deal with the child hunts. So I think there is some subtlety there of like, yeah, things are really bad here, but Selef has yet to see the worst of it. He's yet to be exposed to how low and how depraved these people really are. Um, the implications there are very interesting. Selef is an interesting character. I talked a little bit about him, but I mean, I kind of described him as being kind of boring and milquetoast, but I do think that the context of the story around him helps to drive him to be a little bit more interesting in that he's uh, kind of naive and kind of, just wants to help the world, but hasn't really seen what it's all about. And maybe doesn't fully understand what he's getting into. Kind of the end of the chapter kind of implies that it doesn't imply, it explicitly states that he is willing to accept his role as being the liberator of the world. And I'm curious to see, because I played the game before, but I don't remember the story super well, how, if at all, his character grows or changes or has, I guess not second thoughts, but has how does this decision impact him in any meaningful way? Does it, or does he just turn into another generic Fire Emblem protagonist? Probably that one. I don't think people. I think people like Seliph. I don't think anyone likes him for those reasons, um, or the reason of him being a super interesting, well-developed character with twists and turns and you know stuff like that. I think people just like him because he's compelling. He's a strongly written character who fights for what he believes in, but that's kind of the template that a lot of Fire Emblem protagonists fall into. So it's a little bit disappointing as a follow up to Sigurd, but it is what it is. Now, as for our map gauntlet, I don't really know about this one. I don't think I think that there's some appeal here in seeing numbers go up so fast again. I think that EXP gain really slowed down towards the end of Gen 1 and seeing it pump back up again here and then seeing all the numbers go up and then seeing how low level our units are and getting to play with the novelty of all the builds you did. Um, a lot of my builds are super fun and interesting, even if they're not necessarily optimal. I'm enjoying them a lot. So I think that that's part of the appeal here, and that's not like that's part of the map design. That's something that should be taken into consideration. But in terms of structure, that's a little bit easier to rank, I guess, for lack of a better word, objectively. Every player is going to have the same experience in that regard. So I think that it's all right. It reminds me a little bit of Prologue in the way it splits up your units. Characters are joining in different positions. I think forcing the choice of Johann versus Johavier on you is interesting, and it has some implications for how the rest of the map plays. That's a big choice that will, different players will get different experiences with this map as a result, and even, players on subsequent playthroughs will get a different experience here possibly. This is my first time choosing Johavier, and I can't say that I think that the decision was. I definitely prefer Johann for reasons I went over, but it was definitely a different experience, and I kind of liked how refreshingly fast this map was, because that's the other thing. If you choose Johann, this map can be a pain, especially if you didn't properly plan out your inheritance. Maybe Lana doesn't have any movement staves to help you out. Maybe Seliph doesn't have the leg ring, which he didn't for me. So there's definitely some potential for having a real bad time here. That's kind of the difficulty of ranking the Gen 2 maps, is that if your Seliph has all these decked out is decked out in all this shit and is roided out with the all the step boosters and the Paragon ring and everything, then you're gonna have maybe not a better time, but definitely a different time and much faster experience with these maps, compared to someone who has nothing on Seliph and then me kind of being somewhere in between. I'd say that I'm a pretty good median experience, I guess, for what people are gonna go through, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Anyway, this is all beating around the bush to say I think that this map is fun. I think it's actually maybe one of the better maps in the game so far because, you know, if you choose Johann and you want to get Nosferatu, then you have to. No, wait. No, so if you want to get like that completion and you want to get all the dialogue and any optional conversations, then you need to capture Sephora Castle where Yohalvir is stationed. But you can skip that, and it's not like you're losing out on all that much. So I don't necessarily think that that's an invalid way to play the game. It's not like, skipping significant content on purpose. Um, you're just kind of missing out on some dialogue, and that's not really a huge deal. So I don't think that, you know, it's unreasonable to say, well, if you don't like having to march Celifal around the map to get all the dialogue, you don't have to do it. It's not like you're losing out on anything super significant. So unless you want to get Selith and or Mana married, I guess. But the marriage in this generation has no mechanical implications, so just be for like lover conversations, and you can get those at any time. So you can just have them stand next to each other. It's not that hard to get them married, especially since those two joined so early on. They joined at the same time. Um, so yeah, I don't think that it's unreasonable to uh, not necessarily hold that that pain of having to move Celifal around, capture all these different castles. I think it's okay to not necessarily ignore it, but weight it a little bit less heavily than I might in a different map where the rewards for doing that were more significant or mandatory, like in chapter 2, you know? So I think with all that said, I don't know if I like it more than chapter 3 because you're never really pushed to fight in multiple locations. Only when Fee and Arthur show up, and they're pretty like they clear out their area pretty fast, so it's not like it's going to be a huge part of the map for you. And then once they're done with that, there's really you never really have to do it again. Uh, so it's not, I don't think that I don't think that that aspect of it is super well designed. There's not really any extra anti-turtling incentives other than just the villages, which Fee can like ride around and capture them all really easily. Might take a little while, might lose out on some gold, but I don't think there's any real reason to hurry, especially compared to something like Chapter 2, where you can very easily just lose villages in their entirety. If you're not fast in this, it's like I'm pretty sure you can just get them really quickly, or without much effort on your part, to go fast. So for that reason, I think Chapter 3 is probably better still. I think next week has a decent chance of dethroning it. I like, I mean, I think people who have been listening to this for a little while now maybe can guess why I like it so much. We'll talk more about it. But there's also some aspects of it that I really don't like, so I don't know. I don't that's going to be a really interesting map to talk about, I think. Um so for now, I guess I think that that's all I have to say about the map. Now, if you noticed a transition, maybe a bit of a jarring cut between segments here, it's because that I'm recording this last section, maybe the past like 5 to 10 minutes of this episode have has been recorded at a different time. How long after? Not that long, only about like 3 to 4 weeks. um, yeah, I severely underestimated how much I was gonna get swamped by IRL stuff. And frankly, how much I was going to get sidetracked by doing other things, like for my own entertainment. Like, for example, I've been playing a lot of Nuzlocks of Pokemon recently, and that's been a lot of fun, but it's been taking time away from me doing this, and then I don't have a lot of time. In general, I have to go up to a different state, pretty much weekly at this point, sometimes multiple times a week, and it's a lot of driving, a lot of homework. I'm in grad school, so there's always going to be a lot of homework. I work not full time, but like a decent amount of hours a week, so I'm pretty busy. Um, and then the small amount of free time I do have is taken up by other stuff that I is more like, I guess, instantly gratifying. This is maybe more of a slower burn. I do enjoy doing this still, but I've kind of just been, I don't know, I lost the thread a little bit there. I'm gonna try to get back into it, get the flow back. Now, obviously, this sucks for a couple reasons. I like putting these out, and there are people who listen to them now. The first few episodes, I really had no um, I guess obligation's the wrong word. I don't have an obligation to do it now, but it was less. I felt less like I was actually uh obligated to meet a upload schedule because no one. I had like three people who listened to each episode. Now I have like I was not a lot, but like 30, 40, something like that. Last time I checked. Here, let me see. Yeah, about 40 people have listened to my podcast. That's not a lot of people, but that's hey, 40 people cared enough to start up the episodes. Um, and that means something to me, and then for that reason I think that I am a little bit more invested in um actually putting these out on a fairly regular basis, and that's sometimes just not going to be possible, um which is a bummer. But also the other reason, the more tangible um reason why I don't like having these big delays is because the news segments that I've been doing have been heavily um they become outdated. The longer I wait to put these episodes out, the more outdated they become. So at the time I'm recording this segment, and who knows when I'm actually going to get this episode up, there's probably even more that's going to happen between now and then. But at the beginning of the episode, I mentioned that the midterm results of Choose Your Legends came out, and Gatekeeper was winning and all that stuff. Since then, it's actually been a few days, maybe a week, since the official results were announced, like the final results. Gatekeeper won. Who? Um, so that's a big disparity there, and also I'll mention this here. I know I keep saying I'm not going to talk about heroes, and then I talk about it anyway. But I really, more than any other time, could not get away with not talking about it here because it's genealogy characters. You got Lex, Azel, Aaron or Aaroness now, and Manya, whose name was changed to something completely different that I cannot remember for the life of me, but I'm just gonna keep calling her Manya. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be Manya. That's not her name anymore, but it looks like Manya. So yeah, cool stuff. So I think that to kind of compensate for this, um, I'm gonna start doing these news segments at the end of episodes. It's a little bit counterintuitive. Um, it feels kind of weird to bury the hot segments, hot news segments at the end of episodes, but doesn't it's just to make it so that what I'm saying isn't outdated by the time I actually get the episode out, because obviously I'm a lot more likely to get them out after recording the end of it pretty quickly compared to recording the beginning of it. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have in terms of that status update. But yeah, if you're a listener who has come back for multiple episodes, thank you. I never, I mean, I expected it to get some following. I guess I wasn't expecting it to happen this early. I thought it would be at least I'd have to get into like a game or two before it actually started to get some listeners. So that's pretty cool. I hope you have been enjoying what you have been hearing so far, and I hope to keep up the quality. I think that it's getting like massively better and better every time just because I'm learning little tricks on Audacity to make the audio editing a little bit smoother. I got a new computer with a better microphone, so that's helping. Um, I'm finding better times to record. I've been trying to record more during the day where I can be louder so I can, I'm not like ASMR voice where you can barely hear me. But yeah. So anyway, I've been going on for way too long now, so I'll let you guys get back to whatever you were doing. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you all next week. Yeah, I'm sorry, force of habit. I'll see you guys next time with chapter 7. Bye bye.